And joining us today on our Book Talk segment, great to welcome a man who you see on TV all the time. He's the co-anchor of Nightline and ABC, also on the weekend edition of Good Morning America. You see him on 2020 and on the nightly news broadcast. Dan Harris has written a book called 10% Happier, How I Tamed the Voice in My Head, Reduced Stress Without Losing My Edge, and Found Self-Help That Actually Works. And he's going to tell us a little bit about his story right now. He joined us on the telephone. Dan, a pleasure to talk to you. How are you today?
Thanks for having me. I'm great.
Had a chance to read through the book, and I really didn't know the story about what happened to you on the air. Was that difficult to write about? Obviously, it turned into a good thing for you, but difficult to go through that again, writing about it?
Yeah, it was. I wrestled with whether to talk about the panic attack again. Just for your listeners, I had a panic attack on Good Morning America in 2004. Sorry, I'll get my dates straight eventually. It was 2004 in June. According to the Nielsen ratings, there were 5.019 million people watching, and I was reading the news updates at the top of every hour. The anchors, Diane Sawyer and Charlie Gibson, tossed it over to me, and in the middle of my newscast, I had as I said, a panic attack. I was unable to breathe. My heart was racing. My mouth dried up. My palms were sweating, and I basically had to quit in the middle. And it was very, very. I learned afterwards that the panic attack was likely the result of the fact that I had been doing something very stupid in my personal life, which was I had gotten depressed after covering war zones for many years after 9/11, and I had self-medicated with recreational drugs. And when I realized what a moron I was, that kind of set me off on the strange little journey that I talk about in my book.
Yeah. I do watch you, Dan, but I just wasn't one of those 5.019 million that night or day. But
well, I'm glad you weren't.
Well, I think everybody who's done this kind of work, TV or radio, you tend to feel a little bit like that occasionally before you go on the air, but very frightening when you're actually already on the air and that happens and you don't know what it is, right?
Yeah, I thought my career was going to end. I knew what was happening. Some people, when they're having a panic attack, they think that it's a heart attack or something like that. I knew I was just completely freaking out, really, and that made it worse. The voice in my head was, get it together. There are all these people watching. Nobody, they're all going to see you're a fraud, et cetera, and that the more I started thinking like that, the worse it got.
And this led you to obviously get some help, but kind of a journey of finding out more about yourself. I think you kind of discovered a meditation, which you talk to different people in the book. You describe that in the book, and I think a lot of people have kind of a misconception of what meditation can do. I guess you were one of those who were skeptical, but it's helped you, hasn't it?
Yeah, I always thought meditation was only for weirdos. People who live in a yurt or collect crystals or really get deeply into aromatherapy or whatever, and I just... there was no way I was going to do something like that. But then I found out that it doesn't involve wearing robes or lighting incense or sitting in a funny position or, believing in anything in particular or joining a group. It's basically just simple brain exercise. And there's now an enormous amount of science that suggests it can lower your blood pressure, boost your immune system, increase your ability to focus, and literally rewire parts of your brain that have to do with well-being and stress. And so when I learned all that, I decided to give it a try, and I'm kind of on a mission now to demystify meditation and make people realize that there's now a real elite little subculture of very successful people, from corporate executives to the Marines to the Army to elite athletes, who are using this training to make themselves more focused and less yanked around by their emotions.
And you describe in the book your own personality, and you have to be a driven type of personality at times, particularly in the news business. So your personality is kind of difficult to relax anyway, right? So that made it even tougher for you.
Yeah, I think there's one of the misconceptions about meditation is that it's supposed to be relaxing. It's really exercise for the brain. You are trying to focus on one thing. In the type of meditation I do, you're just trying to feel your breath coming in and out. And as soon as you try to do that, your mind's going to wander all over the place. And meditation is just the act of catching your mind wandering and bringing it back to your point of focus over and over and over and over again. It's like doing a bicep curl for your brain. And that isn't particularly relaxing. It's actually quite difficult. But when you go to the gym and you're running on the treadmill, that's hard too, unless you're cheating. And that's really what meditation is all about.
After this happened, the episode on the air, how long was it before you went back on the air?
Oh, I went on the air an hour later. The panic attack happened at 7 o'clock in the morning, and I went back on at 8. I didn't admit to anybody what had happened because I was embarrassed, and so I really felt like I needed to just kind of get back in the ring and rub some dirt in it and move on. But the problem was I had another panic attack about a year later, and that was when I went to go see an expert in panic who asked me a series of questions, including, do you do drugs? And when I said yes to that, he started leaning back in his chair, gave me a look that said, okay, idiot, mystery solved.
After you started doing your self-treatment, do you still feel any kind of pangs of this, the panic attacks, or has that completely disappeared?
Oh, well, there actually was a pretty big time lapse between the panic attack and my finding meditation. So the way I treated the panic was I stopped doing drugs,
Right.
And that largely took care of it. And in order to stop doing drugs, I went and saw this shrink that I mentioned once or twice a week for many, many years. So this all happened about 10 years ago. I found meditation about 5 years ago. And, I want to be clear. I tell this story about the panic attack not because I'm sending the message that you need to have some crisis in your life in order to find meditation. I tell the story because it's an example of the kind of mindless behavior that we all engage in unless we get a handle on this voice in our head. And, in my case, I was engaged in this mindless behavior where I went to a war zone without really thinking about the psychological consequences. I came home and I got depressed. And instead of dealing with that like an adult, I self-medicated, and it all blew up in my face. And what my argument to your listeners would be, we all have this voice in our head, which is the voice that is chasing us out of bed in the morning, constantly wanting things, not wanting things, judging, comparing ourselves to other people, casting forward into the future instead of and looking back into the past instead of focusing on what's happening right now. And if you're unaware of this voice, it'll yank you around, and meditation is just a great tool for dealing with it.
And the title, 10% Happier, I guess that kind of sets the bar. Maybe people expect you're going to turn around immediately, but 10% happier is better than nothing, right? Is that kind of the point of that 10%?
Well, there's a couple of meanings. Largely it's a joke, because it's obviously impossible to quantify happiness.
Sure.
But partly it's a way to counter-program against the, I think, irresponsible self-help gurus who have sent this message to the culture that you can solve all of your problems through the power of positive thinking. That's not going to happen. And so I think America is ready to have a more mature discussion about happiness. The other reason why I call it 10% happier is that, around the office, in my very skeptical, cynical office, when I first started meditating, a lot of people would ask me, what happened to you? What happened to you? You used to be cool. Why are you meditating? And I started saying to them, because it makes me 10% happier. And I found that when I gave that reasonable return on investment to people, their looks of skepticism were usually transformed into looks of interest.
Well, in addition to the story you tell about yourself, you got some great kind of behind-the-scenes news stories of the people you've worked with. Of course, Peter Jennings, great anchor, and the other folks you've worked with. So it's a kind of a great a story about what goes on in television as well. It's called 10% Happy. We've been talking with Dan Harris today. And Dan, I know the book just came out, doing very well. Do you have a website you can direct people to?
You can find me on Facebook, Dan Harris ABC. There's also at abcnews.com. There's abcnews.com/10% happier. Or just a quick Google search will get you to the book on Amazon, or simple meditation instructions that I put up on the web. It's all up there and for free.
Great, Dan.
Book with the instructions.
Pleasure talking to you. And I know we interrupted your gym time, but appreciate it. And hopefully we can talk to you again. Thanks for joining us.